Hello and welcome back to the course on art programming. And slowly but surely we're making our way to the top. We're at the coordinates layer of our visualization. Last time we talked about facets, and today we're going to learn a lot of things. We're going to learn about limits, zooming in, zooming out, and things like that. So let's dive right into it. So this is what we created last time. Beautiful visualization that is nearly ready. All we have to do is fix up these axes so that the y-axis is from 0 to 100. And how do we do that? We need to learn how to zoom in and zoom out, how to control our coordinates. So let's start talking about that. So today, what are we going to cover? The agenda for today. Today we're going to cover limits, how to limit our axis, and zoom, how to zoom into our axis. All right, what letter are we on? W, U, V, W, X, Y, Z. I don't really want to use X, Y, and Z because that might come off a bit confusing. So let's start somewhere at M, right? M is going to be our letter for today. ggplot, data equals movies, aesthetics. So what are we doing? We're going to be recreating this plot. So not exactly this plot without the facets for now. So we'll just say X equals critic rating, Y equals audience rating, and size. You can actually see now why it's important to give your variables simple names, because you might end up typing them up 100 times like we are. All right, so there's our M. What are we going to do now? We're going to say M plus some points, geom point. Run that. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. All right, so let's say I want to cut out a piece. I want to visualize only this bit. So this top corner, right? The top, what is this called? The first quadrant, or the best quadrant. The movies with the highest ratings. That's what I want to cut out of this plot. So 50 to 100 by critics and 50 to 100 by the audience. How do I do that? Very, very simple. And in fact, we haven't touched on this yet, but we're going to touch on it right now. So geom point, okay. And then we're adding a layer. As we always do, add a layer, which is the limit, x lim 50 to 100. So if I run this, that cuts it off. So you can see here on the left, 50 is the lowest, 100 is the highest. And so basically cut off all the points on the left. And you can see the warning message, remove 304 rows. So this is going to be the key going forward, that it actually not just zoomed in, it actually removed the rows. You set a limit to the value of X. And let's do the same for Y. Y lim 50 to 100. So if I run these three lines now, voila, now we've got that quadrant left. And so we've removed quite a lot of rows in total, right? Quite a lot of values. Okay, so that is a good method, but it doesn't always work. Let's have a look. Won't work always. Won't work. Well, it will work. Won't work well always. Why not? Let's have a look. Let's say N is ggplot, but here we've got data equals movies, as always. And then we have aesthetics, X equals budget, millions, right? What is that going to be? What are we creating here? We're creating a histogram because we only have one axis, or one of those variables, X and Y. Histogram, bin width equals 10. Aesthetic, this is basically the one we've already created. Genre, so that's our histogram, which is the blurry one. And then color equals black. That's a pretty one. All right, so but let's say I want to cut it off up to 50. I want to cut it off over here. Or I want to zoom in. Let's say I want to zoom in from 0 to 50 on the y-axis. And I decide to use the ylim function. So then I say plus ylim 50 to 100, right? So if I run that, what you will see, let me make some space. Well, actually I was going to say 0 to 50, but still. All right, let's do that again. 0 to 50. You can see that it did zoom in to 0 to 50, but it actually cut off any data that was supposed to be above. And that's not what we want. That's like not the opposite of what we want, but it's definitely not what we want. It's very, very bad. Looks not like what we were expecting. We were expecting just to zoom in, not to actually cut out the data. So how do we do that? How do we zoom in? Well, let's look at that. There's a different way. Instead, zoom. So how do we zoom in? Well, what we need to do is, I'm not going to retype this, I'm just going to copy it. there. Okay, that's the plot, right? And now we want to say plus equals, and here what we want, the layer that we're looking for is called chord underscore Cartesian, and this is the Cartesian coordinate system that we're using, the xy, and that's why we're using this function. And here we want to say, instead of ylim and then in brackets like here ylim is a parameter, so we have to say ylim equals and then pass it the values in a vector of 2, 0 and 50. So this is our vector of 2. It's got two values, 0 and 50. We're passing it to ylim, so now it knows that the limits are 0 and 50. And that's called Cartesian. That's a new layer which will zoom in for us. And if we run this, voila, as you can see, we've actually zoomed in, literally zoomed into the chart. And like it's still there, the data is still there, everything is still there. But after this visualization was created, this first bit that we are well familiar with, then a new layer was applied which facilitated the zoom on this chart. Once again, that's how layering works in ggplot. Okay, so now we know how to zoom into our charts. So let's go ahead and zoom in to this beautiful plot that we were creating, right? The one that we really wanted to improve. So let's go ahead and just copy that. And we already have the W letter, so we're not going to copy the W because we're going to carry it along. So improve number 1. And here, so if we run that, what will we see? We'll see that amazing visualization that we like a lot, but it's from -50 to 150, which is not what we want. We're going to say plus chord Cartesian, and here we want to say ylim equals C 0 to 100. All right, if I run that, give it a second, voila, beautiful, exactly what we wanted, right? So here now you can derive so many more insights from this chart. You can see that, you can see the trends. This is exactly what the CEO was asking. Remember that little scribble that we were supplied with at the very start? Well, this is what he wanted. He just didn't know what he wanted. And so like all of these over here at the bottom are statistically probably insignificant, except for probably romance in 2011 really picked up, but otherwise not enough data to make a lot of conclusions. But here we've got some interesting visualizations. So you can see that, for instance, what can we see? We can see that action is, when the critics rate action low, the audience tends to rate it pretty low too, right? But when critics rate it high, audience also rates it pretty high. Whereas in the, what is this, comedy, in the comedy genre, you can see that the audience rarely rates it across the years. The audience rarely rates comedies very low, right? Rates them pretty okay, regardless of how the critics rate them. But at the same time, it is also hard, and has been hard, for comedies to get very high ratings with audience. Like, for instance, in 2008, no comedy ever got a rating over 80. And then improved a little bit, now it's even better. So you can see that the tendency for comedy is that the audience ratings are slowly improving. Whereas with the action genre, even though it's a bit more volatile, so it's a bit riskier to be here, because you can get a bad rating from the audience, but you can also get a very good rating, and irrespective of the year. So if you want to play it safe, you might create a comedy. If you want to be on the riskier side and you want the great ratings for the audience, then you might create an action film. And what else do we have? Well, we've got some information here on drama as well, right? So it looks like, especially in the recent years, looks like people like drama a lot. So if you just look at this smoother, it's sitting, regardless of the critic rating, it's sitting above 50 for the past 3 years, or 2009, 10, 11, or actually all of the years, the smoother, the middle line, is sitting above 50 regardless of the critic rating, which is also an interesting insight. So there we go. So quite a few valuable insights from this one chart, and we'll definitely include it. Finally ready, so let's save it as image. This one's tricky because it's like, if I set different proportions, it might squeeze it. No, it actually looks pretty alright. So let's go ahead and save that. And where is it? There it is. It's going to be our first chart. All right, beautiful. So there we go, one more to go, one more chart to go, and we already know what that is. That's the bar chart which we wanted to improve. And that's what we're going to be talking about next time. We're going to be learning how to further improve our charts. And I hope you enjoyed today's tutorial. I look forward to seeing you next time. Until then, happy coding. Hello and welcome back to the course on our programming. And today we're finally at the top. We're at the top of the food chain. We're talking about the theme layering of our visualizations. And so what does that involve? Well, it involves all of the non-data ink on our chart. So basically when you change the formatting of the text, or you give them colors, or you change where the label is positioned, the legend is positioned, and things like that. So let's see how we can apply all of that. Now, whoa, that came unexpected. That's the beautiful chart that we created last time. And now we're going to recall one of the charts that we created previously, and we're going to improve it by adding a theme to it. Now, ideally, you'd want to add a theme to all of the charts that we created and make them all look stunning for the presentation. But we won't spend all of the time doing this. It would take a couple of tutorials to go through all of them. So we're just going to practice on one. And then in your own free time, you can go back to the charts we've created and do the same operations, because ultimately it's just working with the same types of elements on charts. You can simply replicate the same procedures. Okay, so the letter today is O, and we're going to create the histogram. So let's first find it, improve, right? Let's look for the word improve, and this one, that's the one I'm talking about. So let's copy this line and put it in here. And where was it? This one, that's what I'm after. So let's copy this into today's tutorial. We can close the search. Okay, that's our letter O. And now we want to say O plus. Okay, I've already copied the plus. So what is this? We're creating a ggplot with data equals movies. Aesthetic is the budget millions. And then we're plotting it as his histogram. So we're mapping the fill to genre, and we're setting the color to black. So we're well familiar with this histogram. It's our favorite histogram. We've used it so far many times. All right, and so now what we're going to do is we're going to learn how to add a couple of things. So first we're going to add a label, right? That's what we want to learn how to add. And label basically means the axis label, I meant. Yeah, let's type that in, axes labels. So what we're going to, in fact, what we're going to do is we're going to change, put this into an object so that it's faster. And let's give it a name. Let's say H. If we run that, and now if I run just H on its own, you'll see that the whole histogram is in there, because it includes both the base layer and this additional layer. And we've just saved this new combination of the two inside H, right? And what we're going to do now is on top of H, we're going to add a couple of things so that it is, so we achieve those non-data ink transformations. So let's say H plus, and we'll say X lab, whoops. And we've already actually talked about Y lab, so this should be a bit familiar. Money axis, right? And if we run that, you'll see that at the bottom, it's very small. So if we zoom in over here, it says money axis, right? We changed the name, and we can do the same thing. We can do plus Y lab, and we can say number of movies. So let's maybe put it like that so it looks better. So there we go. So we've relabeled both of the axes. That's great. Now let's format them so they look better. Label formatting. And we're going to say pretty much the same thing. And here we're going to say plus. So this might look a bit complicated, but sometimes it's just best to remember it. So theme axis dot title dot x equals, so the title of axis X equals element. This is the part that you have to remember. Element text, and here's going to be color equals, we're going to say just dark green. So we're not mapping to anything, we're just setting it because it's just the color of the text, right? So color of the text is dark green, the size is going to be 30. And then I want to say comma, and then I want to say axis, just basically, well, let's retype it for practice. Axis title dot y equals element underscore text, and here you want to say color equals red, and size, same thing, equals 30. So if I run this, you'll see that now they're nice and big, size 30, money, axis, and number of movies. Beautiful. Okay, that's a great start. And that's what we mean by non-data inc. And now what we're going to do is we're going to make these tick marks bigger because they're pretty small, right? So let's go ahead and make them bigger. So I'm going to take this, all of this, copy it, and I'll say tick mark formatting. And so basically just inside theme, this is the main function that we're going to be working with, and we'll check it out in just a second. So here we'll say axis dot text dot x equals, that's to get to the tick points, tick marks, text, element text, and then size equals 20. And this one I'm not going to retype. This is going to be y. So let's run this. So there you go. So they're much bigger now, better looking, and much more legible. All right, that's a great thing. So you're probably getting curious about this theme function that we're using. What else can you supply to this function, right? So let's check it out. All right, let's zoom in into here, and what you'll see here, theme elements. So you've got line, rectangle, text, title, aspect ratio, axis title, axis text, ticks, line, background, a lot of stuff. So all of these are how you can control the presentation of your chart, and I highly recommend you just look through them, and whenever you want to do something, just check the theme function and see try to guess what it would be, and it'll probably be there, or you can always check online or look for the help, and it will help you understand which elements of the theme function you need to tweak to get the chart that you are after. So far we've learned quite a few, and let's learn another few that we will need for this plot. So what we want is we want to now control this legend. All right, so let's do that. Let's say legend formatting. All right, so what we are going to do is we're going to say comma, and here I'm just going to add an extra space, so just that we have some space. Not necessarily don't have to add it. Element, so legend title element underscore text, and here we're going to say size equals 30, and legend dot text, as you can imagine, that's the actual names of the categories. Element underscore text, size equals 20, and let's end on that for now. Let's run that. Okay, you can see it's much bigger. And now I'm going to show you another thing. So if you put in this, how to control the positioning of the legend. So what we need to do is first we want to say legend position, legend dot position. So I want to put it in this top corner over here on the chart, on the actual chart. Legend position, and that way I want to say C11. So you can pass 0 or 1, and once again you can find all this information in the help of theme. So 0 is left, 0 is the start of the axis, so basically this is 0 0, this is 1 0, this is 0 1, this corner, and this corner is 1 1. So I want it in the top right corner. If I just run this, you will see that it gets put in the top corner, but it gets put there kind of like crooked. That's because I need to set an anchoring point. You need to say legend dot justification equals C11. So which corner of the legend, once again, bottom left, bottom right, top left, or top right, do you want to put in this corner? I want to put the top right corner of the legend in the top right corner of the chart. So if I run this now, beautiful, right? So now the legend is actually where it's supposed to be. It's on the chart in the top right corner, and we saved all of that white space on the right. Okay, one more thing left, and that is, of course, the title of the plot. How do we add a title to the plot? You need to add a layer which is called GG title, and in here you type in the title of your plot, which is movie, for us is movie budget distribution, and then you add that plus back. So if I run this, you will see that the titles appeared, but it's very small. So how do we format the title itself? Well, we go back into the theme function, and here we just say plot.title equals element underscore text color. Let's give it a color like dark blue. Then we'll say size. Well, let's put this on a new line. Size equals 40, and family. Well, this is the font. I just wanted to show you how you can change the actual font. And here we'll say Courier. All right. So if we run this now, it's dark blue, it's big, and it's in a different font. Beautiful. I think we've done a great job, and I think now we can, with a lot of pride, take this and put it into the final report. And let's put the resolution. Now let's go ahead and copy this, or well, just save it, and we'll copy it into our final presentation over here. And voila, everything is beautifully done. So we've got this final client deliverable with all of these beautiful visualizations in it. And I think we've done a great job overall. So today we learned quite a few things, most of them relating to the theme function, and we talked about how to add non-data ink to our charts. So have a play around with that, check out all the other, or some of the other options that are available to you in theme, and maybe see how else you can improve this chart. And I look forward to seeing you next time. Until then, happy coding. Hello and welcome back to the course on R programming. And by now you've probably typed up the word ggplot about 1,000 times. Now I'm sure it's not as many as that, but still we use ggplot so much throughout this section that I'm quite confident that you are now able to use it on a very intuitive level. And also we learned so much about movies. Personally, I learned so much that I feel like a movie ratings expert right now. And today we're going to quickly recap on what we learned in this section of the course. So in this section, we learned, number one, grammar of graphics and ggplot2. So we had that interesting presentation which started off with Charles Minard's visualization of the French going into Russia and coming back, and how he combined, using layers, all sorts of different information on this one small two-dimensional chart. And that kind of started off this movement of plotting, or inspired this movement of plotting visualizations using layers. And we talked about the 7 different layers that we're going to use in our plots. And can you recall those layers? Those layers were data, aesthetics, geometries, statistics, facets, coordinates, and themes. And so then we proceeded on to discuss those layers in more detail throughout this section. So the next thing that we learned in this section was factors in R. And factors are basically categorical variables. So we already touched on factors previously in the course, but here we actually covered them off, so we totally understand what factors are now. And they're very simple. It's basically a way that R stores categorical variables. And we also learned how to convert non-factor variables or columns that should be factors into factors. So we had an example of the year column, which was recognized as a numeric column, but we wanted it to be a factor, so we learned how to very quickly convert that to be what we want it to be. Then we talked about aesthetics and ggplot. So we started using our data to create visualizations, and we learned about different aesthetics, so how to set the X, what data or what information is going to go into the X-axis, what's going to go into the Y-axis, what's going into the color, what's going into the size. So all of those things are aesthetics, as we discussed in this course. And then we talked about plotting with layers. So in this tutorial, we discussed that you can control which layer goes on top in your image based on how you specify it in the code. So the layers that come to the left or come earlier in your code, they will go lower on your image. So the latest layers, the layers that are to the most right or to the end of your code, to that chain that you're creating, chain of layers that you're creating in your code using the plus sign, The layers on the very right will go to the top. The layers on the left will go towards the bottom of your visualization. So it's a very handy tool. Remember that visualization that we had with lines and at the same time scatter plot. So did we want the lines on top or did we want the scatter plot on top? Very easy to control using your code. Then we talked about overriding aesthetics, very powerful feature as well. So if you already have some aesthetics set, for instance, you might have an aesthetic for size, but then in a certain layer of your plot you want to change that, you can easily override that aesthetic. ggplot2 allows you to do that, so it's always good to keep in your mind that you have control of these things as well. Then we talked about mapping versus setting, a very powerful tutorial, or very powerful concept I should say, on the difference between the two. So do you want to map an aesthetic? So for instance, if you have color, do you want to map color to a variable? Like what did we use, like genre, for instance, right? Do you want to map the color? That's called mapping, when you're attaching a certain variable or certain column in your data set to an aesthetic. The other option is you can set the aesthetic. You can actually say, I just want the color to always be blue. And that way you're not mapping it, you're just setting it. And the ways to do this in ggplot are a bit different. So for mapping, because it's like the way to remember it, because it's a bit of a more complex operation, for mapping you need to use the AES function. So to map an aesthetic you need the AES function. To set an aesthetic you don't need the AES function, and people who are starting off with R sometimes forget about it and they use the AES function for setting, and that can cause serious issues in your visualization. So just remember the difference between the two and always ask yourself, am I mapping this aesthetic or am I setting it? And based on your answer, you will know how to proceed with your code. Then we talked about histograms and density charts, had some very lovely examples, some good visualizations of histograms and density charts. So remember that histograms have a parameter called fill, which is the inside color, and they also have just color, which is the color of the border of the histogram. And also to create a histogram you only need one variable, because the bins are created automatically for you by ggplot. It's actually that smart. So in that way, histograms is kind of combining both geometry and statistics, because in the background some statistics are being run for you, and that's how they're being combined. And also we talked a bit about density charts. You might not end up using them a lot, but it's also good to know that you do have the opportunity to use density charts if you need them, and how to create them using ggplot. All right, then we talked about starting layer tips. So I just gave you some tips on where do you specify certain things in your visualization. So should you specify your data in this very starting foundational layer, or should you specify it later? Should you specify your aesthetics at the start or further on? And ultimately it all depends on what you want from your visualization. What are you going to be changing? If you're going to be changing your color aesthetic a lot throughout your different layers, then maybe it's not a good idea to specify it at the start. Or for instance, if your data set is set in stone and you're not going to be changing it throughout your different layers, then it's a good idea to specify it at the start of your visualization. So just, think strategically about how you're going to create this plot and what is going to be constant, what's going to be variable, and from that you can decide where to specify those things, in which layers of your plot to specify those things. Then we talked about statistical transformations. So we had a look at a couple. We talked about the smoother or geom smooth. We talked about the jitter, the box plot, and those are just a few examples, but already we were able to create some very powerful visualizations with those box plots and just with those statistical transformations. I really like that box plot visualization because you could identify which genres of movies are more likely to be successful, all things being equal. And I think we had we found that horror movies are the least successful ones, and the most successful ones, thrillers have the highest chance of being successful if you create kind of like a statistically average type of movie. Then it will probably have a higher rating with your audience. And also I had a mini challenge for you there to create the box plot for the critic ratings. That one also looked a little bit different. You probably noticed that it was much more stretched out, so more variance in the box plots for the critic ratings. Then we talked about using facets. This was quite a long section. We're already up to point 10. So we talked about using facets. Facets allow you to create lots of different plots within one plot. So basically recycle your plot for different categories, whether it's years or whether it's genres or something else, and that allows you to drill into these separate categories or into these categories separately. So sometimes you might want to use facets, sometimes you might decide not to, but in some cases they are quite handy, and we saw a few examples of when facets should probably be used even in our challenge. And then we talked about coordinates. So coordinates are it's the up at the top. So I think it's a sixth layer of the visualization. That's how you can zoom into your chart. You can specify whether you want a XY coordinates, you want polar coordinates, maybe you want a map, all these different types of things. But we were using coordinates predominantly for zooming into parts of our chart. And finally, we talked about themes. So themes are your non-data ink. They're just ways to make your visualizations look pretty and more appealing to the eye. So I hope you enjoyed this section. We definitely covered off a lot about ggplot, but as you can see, it's all quite simple stuff. And that's why I really like ggplot2, this package, because it's all very logical and very straightforward stuff. So there we go. Don't forget to do the quiz for this section to assess your progress. And also I have another exciting challenge for you. It's going to be even more movies, even more information, more columns about movies. I'm sure you're going to enjoy that as well. And I look forward to seeing you next time. Until then, happy coding. Hello and welcome back to the course on R programming. And today we've got another exciting challenge to help us practice the skills that we've learned. And once again, we're going to be talking about movies. All right, so let's jump straight into it. The Movie Reviews website was very happy with your deliverable for the previous assignment, and now they have a new request for you. The previous consultant had created a chart for them, which is illustrated on the next slide. However, the R code used to create the diagram has since been lost and cannot be recovered. Your task is to come up with the code that will recreate the same chart, making it look as close as possible to the original. A new dataset has been supplied. Alright, so that sounds like an exciting challenge, and before we move on to the actual visualization that we need to create, I would like to show you the dataset first because that'll help us understand what's going on. So in order to get the dataset, you need to go to www.superdatascience.com/rcourse. So rcourse is one word here. And if on this website you scroll down to section 6, then you will find the challenge, which is the PDF file with the challenge, which you can download. So you can see the image right in front of you, and also the homework dataset, which we'll go through right now. So here's the dataset, and as you can see, there are many more columns than what we worked with in the previous challenge. So let's have a look at them and go through them one by one. The first column is day of the week, and it tells us which day of the week the movie was released on. Then we've got the director's name, the genre of the movie, the title of the movie, the release date, the studio that released the movie. So you've got studios like Sony, Paramount Pictures, Warner Brothers, and so on. You've got the adjusted gross. So we've got the gross in millions of dollars here. That's how much the movie grossed worldwide. But the adjusted gross is the same number adjusted for inflation of ticket prices. So because some of these movies were released long time ago, like back all the way back to the 1930s, obviously you have to adjust by ticket price inflation to get a comparable figure. However, that won't really be impacting us in this specific challenge. Then we've got the budget of the movie. Then we've got the IMDb rating, the Movie Lens rating, overseas. So this is the overseas gross, how much the movie made not in the US. Overseas percentage, so what percentage of the gross was made overseas as opposed to in the US. The profit in millions of dollars, the profit percentage, so that's basically the profit divided by the budget of the movie, which is over here. Then we've got the runtime in minutes, how long the movie was. And finally, we've got the US gross. So how much did the movie make in the US? So US gross and the overseas gross over here together make up the total gross. And finally, we've got the gross percentage in the US. So what percentage of the revenue was made just in the US? All right, so there we go, quite a lot of columns. I know it might feel overwhelming, but let's now go on to the visualization and see what we're talking about there. So here's our visualization. It looks pretty neat and actually very similar to some of the visualizations that we created throughout the section. This is a box plot with a jitter in the background. And what is it visualizing? Well, first of all, we've got the genre on the x-axis, and then we've got the gross on the vertical axis. It's actually gross percentage US, which means it's that last column that we were looking at. What percentage of the gross revenue was made in the US? And as you can see here, for instance, adventure movies, it's about just under 40%, whereas comedy movies, over 40%, nearly 50% of a revenue on average is made in the US by comedy movies. So that's what this plot is visualizing. Then you've got the budget, which is the size of the bubbles, which makes sense. And you've got the studio, which is the color of the bubbles. And if you think about it, it's actually just a combination of quite a few things that we learned. So some aesthetics over here and over here and over here. And then we've got a box plot, we've got a jitter. What else do we have? We've got some themes. So you can see that throughout this plot, the Comic Sans MS font has been used. Then some of the font colors have been changed and the sizes have been adjusted. So just a combination of all the things. And it's simply a matter of going through the steps that we learned and creating this beautiful visualization. So there we go. If you're comfortable with this challenge, if you're comfortable to jump straight into it, then go ahead and stop this video and you can proceed with this homework exercise. However, as always, I would like to give you 2 hints. So the first hint is going to be just a slight hint, so feel free to listen through this one. Let's go into hint number 1. Hint number 1 is that you should notice that the studio here and the genre are not complete. So notice that not all genres and studios are used. You will need to filter your data frame after importing the CSV file. In the CSV file, we've got many more studios than that and many more genres than that. So you will need to first filter your data frame after you've imported the actual data and then proceed with the visualization. Otherwise, you will end up with too many box plots and too many colors. So that's a simple hint, hint number 1. And as usual, we're going to proceed to hint number 2 now. Hint number 2 is, of course, our fill in the blanks exercise. Let's go and have a look at that. So if on this page you download the last file, it'll be a zip file, and inside you've got an R file with the fill in the blanks exercise. And here I've got it brought up for us. So once again, you just need to look for the underscores and replace them with what should be in their place. So here we've got all of the steps, lots of comments on what we're doing, and it should help you get through this exercise. Even if you're not entirely comfortable jumping into it by yourself, you should be quite okay going through it with these fill in the blanks. And if at any point you feel stuck, just refer back to the tutorials in this section and you will definitely find your way through this exercise. As you can see, it's a bit longer than usual, but that's just because we're adding layers and layers and layers of visualization into our plot. And there we go. That's the challenge for today. Don't forget to check out the solution in the separate section at the end of the course, and I wish you the best of luck. And until next time, happy coding!